Howdy, my name is Aaron Pickens, and I am an assistant professor of fine arts and new media at Indiana University, Kokomo. Next week, we will be going into the basics of digital art. And so I think it's beneficial for me to give you a little bit of insight into my background as an artist, as a creative. I actually started off in music. I really loved playing guitar, and I loved doing audio engineering. So here are a few images of me and my best friend recording in the studio, and then some album artwork from kind of our last endeavor, our last album. And this kind of set into motion kind of my creative interest. Although I ended up pursuing audio engineering initially in undergrad at University of Michigan, I quickly transferred to Bowling Green State University. At Bowling Green State University, I focused on animation and illustration, between doing 3D modeling, doing some hand-drawn animation, and then stuff in After Effects. I really loved telling stories, and that was something that was kind of at the heart of who I am and still continue to be. In addition to focusing on kind of more digital illustration, animation, I also took classes in traditional photography. And I really loved going out into the environment and capturing kind of what I stumbled upon. And there's something about that that's really free. While I was kind of focusing on both animation, digital illustration, my senior year in undergrad, I took my first painting course. And in this, I wanted to tell stories. It kind of culminated in this particular work, which synthesized kind of everything that I had learned in my undergraduate education. So this is a large digital painting that combined both vector and raster graphics together. Some of the stuff that we will be talking about in the coming week. I was really inspired by film. A lot of these artists that kind of help develop animated films, they're excellent painters. They have to work out of their imagination to visualize what these films will look like, and that was really inspiring. So Dice Sasumi, who was an art director for Pixar, would do these preliminary digital paintings to kind of envision the lighting within each film. And it wasn't just concocted completely out of his imagination. Although he was able to do that, it all resulted from his ability of being able to paint from life, specifically going out into the landscape and painting directly from observation. So all of these artists that were really engaged with this particular practice were stating you need to go out and paint and draw from life. Kind of while I was focused on those more commercial related artists, I went on a trip to Washington, D.C., and I saw this painting by Rembrandt. And there was something about it that spoke to me. It felt like this individual was still looking at me, but they were alive. And it sounds kind of strange, but it showed me that there was something magical about what oil paint can do. And it, for a lack of a better way of saying it, was life-changing. And so I decided, well, this might be something I need to continue. This might be something I need to pursue. So I graduated from my undergrad, and I was very fortunate. I got to work for a small game studio. And so I was the sole artist that did a bunch of character design in order to bring their games to fruition. And while I was doing that, admittedly, I was applying for grad school because I knew that, well, as much as I loved working commercially, there was something about that Rembrandt painting, about doing something beyond just something for entertainment purposes that I needed to explore. And so my education took me to Edinburgh University in Pennsylvania. It's just south of Erie, PA. There, well, I continued to kind of dabble between both traditional and digital art, kind of doing stuff that I felt was necessary for me. I wanted to make artwork that still had a sense of humor. And so you can see the caught in the pickle painting. But I was also trying to really hone my craft, hone my ability to paint with oil paint to the best of my ability. It kind of culminated in a body of work that used toys and still lifes to tell playful stories. And so here's an example from my thesis exhibition called Dawn of the Donut, where I staged a barrel of monkeys around an eclair in kind of this homage to one of my favorite movies, 2001: A Space Odyssey. After I graduated with my MFA, I was fortunate enough to get a position as a studio assistant for a digital installation artist. Specifically, I worked for Erwin Rettel, who does large-scale light installations kind of throughout the entire world. One of my main jobs working for Erwin was every time he did an installation, he would have both video and photo documentation of his work. It was my job to take that information and edit it in the computer and to kind of best represent it. So in addition to kind of polishing up the final documentation of his artwork, I also helped visualize and conceptualize some of his ideas, whether that was using 3D modeling or After Effects or some other means to kind of pre-visualize what he wanted to achieve. And this would be done in order to kind of maybe secure funding or potential opportunities for him to develop his artwork. And so here's an example of a 3D model of an installation that ended up in France. In addition to working for Erwin, I also have been fortunate to have gotten a number of commissions. I worked for one of my best friends and helped produce some visualizations for his musical projects. I also was approached about doing some illustrative work. And these were just some possible games and products that would be playful but also educational. Admittedly, some of these didn't come to fruition, but it was still an opportunity for me to explore my craft as an artist, as an illustrator. Now to my current work, kind of going back to that painting from Rembrandt and even some of the Impressionists such as Van Gogh, Monet. I love going out into the landscape and painting on location. There's something really satisfying about being in the moment and trying to capture exactly what you see. So here's an example of something I did this past October, just right down the street. Been looking at these cars for a long time, and I finally went out and actually transcribed it in about 3 hours with oil paints on just a panel. And whether or not the painting turns out, there's something great about that exploration. It's challenging, but it's also a great memory. And although I don't do too many landscape paintings of a large scale or in the studio, this was a commission from 2022 that someone had given me a photograph and I transcribed it to the best of my knowledge. I kind of prefer working strictly from life when I'm doing landscape-based subject matter, but this was a nice challenge. Now, for some of my most recent work, this is a painting from 2021 called Blockhead. Once again, I love humor. Although it's not as narrative-based, it's still using a lot of the same imagery of kind of toys and things associated from childhood. Now, in the exhibition space, I have Blockhead kind of situated in the center of the room, and kind of surrounding the figure are these other 8 portraits, the larger portraits, and they're all kind of staring, looking at me, almost kind of contemplating and judging who I am. And so it's a different way of me trying to allude to a narrative. Now, for my process, for some of my paintings, they start out like this, where I actually use just toys and kind of cardboards. Sometimes I have an idea in mind that I want to say, and other times it kind of emerges from these sorts of relationships between the toys and the process of developing a scene. And so you can see the cardboard, and I have some figures with their head buried in the sand and a sheep. After I have that all kind of refined in terms of the layout, then I will photograph it. And so you can see kind of the final edited photograph. And then here is the final painting based off of that diorama and that photograph. Now for my last painting, it's maybe a little bit darker than some of my other imagery, but it's still kind of critical, but still using some of the same playful imagery that I've adopted throughout most of my work. Now, although I kind of go back and forth between traditional and digital work, a lot of times my ideas are all done in the computer using Photoshop. And the workshop that we're going to go into in the coming week is more or less going to focus on the basics of this program. This is something that we'll kind of learn throughout this upcoming week, but it's something that you can investigate continuously. And it's a really useful tool, so I'd encourage everyone to not only use it for the in-class exercise, but to investigate it beyond that. One nice thing about art is you can make something from nothing, and it's totally your own. That's really fun, and that's really exciting.